In 2019, I had bought my sister and I tickets to see 21 Pilots in Oklahoma City. At the time, I was a 20-year-old petite woman, and I am a super fan of their music. So I made my sister and I pack and be ready to line up at the venue around 2 to 3 a.m. to get decent spots in the pit. We got there and we were greeted by other fans and we had a pretty good time. I was able to park my car in a lot pretty close to the venue and got away with it until about 5 to 6 in the morning, when police and venue management came and told us that anyone parked on that lot would be towed if not moved in the next hour. At that time, the venue management had made an actual line clear up to the door. My sister didn't have her license at the time and we were able to become acquainted with some of the people in line. So it felt comfortable enough for her to stay in line while I found somewhere new to park. Fast forward to me finding a Sonic that was close by, and I figured I could get away with free parking. I started close to a mile walk back to the venue. I then found an alleyway that looked to be one of those nightlife streets that are connected to the bars. Since it was broad daylight and I knew I would save time going this route, I wasn't apprehensive about taking the alleyway back. About halfway through the alleyway, I saw a thin man, no later than his 40s, sitting at one of the bar's back patios. When he saw me, he made a joke about a pillow I was carrying. My sister had texted me and asked me to bring one back so she could take a nap before the concert. He then asked me where I was headed, in which I stupidly told him the concert downtown. He asked me if I wanted drugs, in which I replied no, and then asked if he could come with, which I lied and told him it was sold out. This entire exchange, I kept walking while he was talking to hopefully shake him off or show no interest in the conversation. When I reached the end of the alley, I had a bad feeling that I was being followed. So when I turned the corner, I quickly jogged to hopefully gain some distance between us if that was the case. Unfortunately, I was correct. I remember hearing fast footsteps following behind me and then abruptly stopping when I turned to look behind me. It was almost like a movie where he would rush behind something when I turned, thinking I didn't see him. At this point, I panicked and started trying to spot the closest store to me. It was 5:30 to 6 in the morning at this point, so anything I did pass was closed, plus I was in a suburban area with more apartment buildings and stores. I turned another corner and I saw a man was coming out of his home. I hurried up to the man and remember asking him if he could help me because I was scared and felt unsafe because there was someone following me. At this point, the scrawny man from the alley had gained on me and was only a few feet away from us. The man following me then began telling the guy I was asking for help that I was a liar and don't listen to her, man. The guy coming out of his home then looked at me and then the creep and then told me, "Sorry, I can't help you," and proceeded to close his door in my face. I have never to this day felt so utterly helpless in my life. I turned to the creepy guy and pled with him to please leave me alone. He kept telling me that I wasn't going anywhere and I wasn't going to no concert, and a bunch of other threatening comments. By some luck, I was able to spot a group of people in 21 Pilots march across the street and sprinted across and started walking next to them. I quickly told them what was happening and if I could walk with them to the venue, and they told me yes. I think the creepy man lost interest in me, and I saw him walking slowly back in the opposite direction. I was able to make it back to the venue fine, but I immediately broke down upon seeing my sister. I thanked my new acquaintances and called the cops. I was told, "He does that a lot and he's not harmless." And I was told by the venue's bodyguards that they would walk me to my car after the concert, but upon returning to the same spot for them to do so, they weren't there. To say I was pretty disappointed on how it was handled is an understatement. It still freaks me out to this day how easily I could have been taken, or if I'd even be here to tell anyone the story. I was always an extremely small and sickly child. I looked young for my age. My family and I lived out of town, about 8 miles out. Our little community was next to a highway. The school bus would drop me off about 2 blocks away from my home. One day I noticed a red truck following slowly behind me, so slow that I figured they were just looking for a house or something. I ignored it and walked to my house. That was the end of that. Consistently, this truck would follow slowly behind me. After a couple days of this, I walked into my house, and I was always the first one home, and then I looked out of the window. Inside was an older man in a black Labrador. He was staring at me, idling inside of his truck. Then he pulled away. I decided enough was enough and I finally told my parents. Of course, my sister was quick to jump in and say that I was lying. I had a habit of telling stories, but my mom thankfully believed me. She drove me to the bus stop the next morning. The red truck was there, across the street at the gas station, pointing towards the bus. I got on the bus and my mom decided to drive around the truck. She described the scene. The man was disheveled and dirty, hunched over in his seat just staring at the bus. His license plates were caked in mud, so she couldn't make them out. It freaked her out so much that she called the police and the school. I went to school and was quickly pulled into the office. The man had been spotted at the school waiting in his truck. That day I rode the bus home. This time the truck was parked alongside the street. I would have to walk past this man's driver's side door to get home. I debated, considered running for it. Apparently this man was getting desperate now that he was spotted. A police car showed up and I talked to the policeman. They went to go talk to the man. He quickly pulled away from the curb and took off down the highway. Never saw him again, and I don't believe that he was ever caught. Because of this experience, I am extremely guarded and paranoid with my own daughter and her soon-to-be sibling. The world is a terrifying place these days and children go missing so easily. I don't like to think about if I had been grabbed. I wouldn't be here typing this. My kids wouldn't exist. I was lucky. Many children aren't. So stranger with ill intentions, let's not meet. This happened when I was about 16 years old, so about 20 years ago. I have 5 younger siblings and my little sister would have been about 5 years old. We lived in a bad neighborhood, in the housing projects. And our neighbor was nice, but she always had sketchy looking people hanging around, especially men. One day these 2 new guys started hanging out there every day. They'd always be outside smoking or just sitting on her porch. They made me really uncomfortable. They were always staring at me and would sometimes try to get me to walk over and talk to them. Or they'd come over into our yard when my parents weren't home and talk to me, asking me if I had a boyfriend and asking me if I wanted some beer or weed. I was a goody two-shoes Mormon girl, so I usually declined those offers and told them that I just had to go inside. They were probably both around 30 years old or so. Then they started coming over and asking to use our phone when my parents weren't home. My parents always let the neighbors use our phone, so I never said no, but I would just pass it through the door and make them stay on the porch. They'd sometimes ask to come in or try to talk to me, but I would tell them no because my parents weren't home. Now I realize how dumb that was because they could have just pushed the door open, but I was raised to ignore red flags and be polite and sweet at all times. Anyway, we had a little dog and I always took him outside early in the morning on a leash. I was out one morning and one of the guys came outside and stood there staring at me for a few minutes and then went back in. I brought the dog inside and just a few minutes later, there's a quiet knock on the door. I opened it and both of the guys are there and one says, "We just saw your baby sister out by the highway. You need to come get her." I panicked and ran outside with them. I started to run down our street towards the highway and one of them says, "No, we'll drive you down there. We need to hurry." I seriously took 2 steps towards the truck before I realized what I was doing. I stopped and said that I needed to go back inside and tell my parents, and the man closest to me grabbed my arm and jerked me towards the truck yelling, "We have to go now. She's going to get hit by a car." I instantly felt sick and just yelled, "Let go of me." He dropped my arm and I ran back inside my house. I ran into my parents' bedroom to wake them up and my little sister was sleeping in their bed with them. I woke everyone up because I was freaking out. My dad ran outside and the guys in their truck were gone. I never saw them at the neighbor's house again. I wish I could say that my parents called the police or something, but they just kind of shrugged it off and made excuses like maybe they saw another kid that looked like your sister.